Good morning. We're in a series, a 3-week series on the latter days, on the last days, the 70th week, as Daniel's vision shared, and about the last days before Christ's return and what that will look like. And last week, we spent primarily focused on the things leading up to the beginning of the 7 years of the tribulation. So the Antichrist comes at some point in those 7 years. Most people feel like the building or establishment of the holy temple of the Jewish people over in Jerusalem is where, at some point along those 7 years, must be built. But the Antichrist comes pretty much is kind of the kickoff of those 7 years. What we looked at last week, very quickly to run through everything, was that some things that have happened that are leading up to that God told us would happen that we could watch for. It says, when you see these things happen, these will be hidden up until the time when it's time for you to understand that I'm coming back. Daniel told us these things, seal them up until the end. Seal up these prophecies. But when they start to make sense, you know that the time is right, that the time is now. So last week we looked at just one of the most amazing prophecies I think there is of the rebirth of Israel as a nation. God went so far as to, even though we didn't see it initially, almost give us the exact year of when Israel would be reborn. Not in the history of recorded history has there been a nation that has disappeared from the face of the earth, much less for 2,000 years, and then come back and done so at that, as God prophesied, as was told, in a single day. So God's Word told us, as we looked at last week, that who can understand this? Who can fathom that something would, or that a nation would be born in a single day? But that's what happened in 1948 on May 14th. A treaty was signed, and before treaties were even conceptualized in the days of the Old Testament, Israel became a nation again after being scattered for 2,000 years in a single day. We looked at that it would be this generation. So Jesus told us, when you see Israel reborn, it will happen in this generation, which a generation was defined as 70 or 80 years if you're lucky. So we're kind of approaching that 80-year mark. That there would be we also saw that there would be a gathering from the north, and in that we saw that 1.2 million Jews have migrated from Russia, from the north. That Russia said, okay, fine, we'll let you. They had held back for the longest time, and then over a course of about 20 years, 1.2 million Jews have migrated back. We saw the prophecy of there'd be a regathering from Ethiopia, specifically named out. We saw how, even though Ethiopia is a fairly small country with a small Jewish population, 80,000 Jewish Ethiopians have moved back. We ran through some of this more quickly, but that was part of last week. We saw that Israel would become a beautiful and fertile nation. We went through several examples of how green things have become, how produce has. They invented the concept of drip irrigation. So if you've got those little drip runners, they invented that because of the efficiency of that and the need to have efficient water flow. And they invented that, and as a result, they supply enormous amounts of citrus. Their wheat production has just skyrocketed. Flowers are one of their primary exports. So where the prophecies talk about how the flowers will bloom and the flowers will return, it's these type of technological things. I pulled some pictures. I went back and granted, these are black and white pictures, so of course everything looks gray and dirty and brown. So you can't see some of the green stuff that's in these pictures. But these are early 1900 pictures of Israel. But particularly like this one, you can see dust and dirt with the trees stepped up. I've had the benefit of staring at these closely on a computer screen. But compared to today, this is Israel. This is Mount Carmel and Galilee and the Golan Heights, and just a beautiful sunset over Jerusalem right there. So granted, those pictures are contrasted black and white versus color, but nevertheless, we see the beauty of Israel today. We also saw last week that worldwide communications would come into play. The prophecy that in the end times, 2 witnesses would be killed, and people from all nations would watch and celebrate as these 2 witnesses of the testimony of Jesus Christ was shared. For that to happen, who could have imagined things like CNN and worldwide satellite that communicates signals, but nevertheless for the whole world to watch, without the words to say it back then, they were saying what we see today, the worldwide communication, the web, the television satellite type transmittals. We saw that there'd be a great increase in knowledge. We saw that there'd be a great increase in travel. We saw one of the another akin to rebirth of Israel, that the Hebrew language would be restored. It says, I will restore to my people a perfect language. The perfect language in the Old Testament was very commonly understood. They considered Hebrew the perfect language. So when this prophecy says, I will restore to my people a perfect language, or God's language, that was understood to be Hebrew. For 2,500 years, Hebrew was not spoken. It died as a language roughly 2,500 years ago, is what most scholars would attribute to kind of the period. And then early 1900s, a set of Jewish people desiring for their country to be rebuilt, reformed, said, let's reestablish Hebrew. We need that. If we're going to be a nation, we need Hebrew back. And sure enough, today, Hebrew is spoken in the streets every bit as much, if not more so, than English or any other language over there. In fact, the websites have a button to translate into Hebrew if you are from over there. So Hebrew, a dead language, once again, never happened before. Latin, it's a good example. Nobody speaks Latin anymore. It's been gone 2,000 years. Hebrew was dead 2,500 years and now is spoken. Finally, we looked at the rebuilding of the Holy Temple. The amazing prophecy, the Antichrist is going to come and he's going to take the seat in the Holy Temple and he's going to declare himself to be God. He's going to, so therefore we know the temple has to be rebuilt. And we saw the amazing current day events of this body called the Temple Institute that was assembled for the purpose of assembling the Sanhedrin Council, which has happened about 10, 15 years ago. They've decided what the parameters of certain artifacts should be to rebuild, and they've rebuilt the majority of them. They've actually got the cornerstones for the temple cut, waiting in place. They have supposedly they have the red heifer. They won't admit to that, but they make comments like, well, if I told you where it is, or if I told you about it, I'd have to kill you. So the red heifer is ready to go. And when we saw the amazing thing that happened in January, the beginning of this year, 2011, the head of the Temple Institute came to America on a tour, and in that tour was revealing, I have in my hand the blueprint for the temple with the schematics, with the electrical designs, with every level of detail you could need to say, go and start building. So amazing times, and we actually saw the video that they've prepared. Their engineers have actually prepared a fly-through of the Sanhedrin Council room and the bulk of the section of the temple that's not the Holy of Holies. I don't think we'll ever get to see the Holy of Holies design, so that may be one reason why they didn't show that.